Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next panel, Post-COVID, How Blockchain Landscape Changed After 2020. I hope you're enjoying GBA Blockchain Week so far. Some really fantastic speakers. And of course, I'm talking about the speakers right now with us today. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Angie, CEO and Editor-in-Chief of Forkast. In the 2 years that we've been covering blockchain, the industry has exponentially grown. It's evolved, it's retracted, and then it's sped ahead again. And the innovation at times, it feels like, is evolving faster than anyone can understand. One could say that in 2019, it was estimated that about 80% of global corporates were undergoing some form of digital transformation. Since COVID-19, you can be absolutely sure that 100% of global corporates are in some stage of it. And blockchain truly is at the center of all of this. So how has blockchain changed after 2020? What phase are we in now? Let me introduce our guests right now. First off is Sheila Warren. She's head of data, blockchain, and digital assets, and a member of the executive committee at the World Economic Forum. She began her career as a Wall Street attorney at Cravath, Swaine, and Moore before turning to philanthropy and civic technology over a decade ago. And over the course of her career, Sheila has represented banks, philanthropists, and progressive nonprofits, and most recently serving as the VP of Strategic Alliances and General Counsel at TechSoup. I could go on and on, Sheila, but we are thrilled to have you join us on the panel. And of course, I have to introduce Dr. Ben Goertzel. He is the founder and CEO of SingularityNET. This is a blockchain-based AI marketplace. Dr. Goertzel is also chief scientist of Hanson Robotics. This is a Hong Kong-based engineering and robotics firm that is best known for their development of human-like robots with AI. I have met Sophia. She's fantastic. Ben, I know your work well. We've often chatted about it. But Ben's research work encompasses artificial general intelligence, natural language processing, cognitive science, data mining, machine learning, computational finance. I could also go on and on about all your scientific books, your technical papers, and your journalistic articles, but I think the audience has a really good sense of depth and why we should all really be excited to listen in on your thoughts. And so I just want to get started here with you both. COVID-19 really threw us all for a lark. It was not only a human crisis, it was for many a corporate existential crisis, a human health crisis, a mental health crisis, so many things that we can understand about COVID. But in blockchain, it was also where we saw an industry accelerate. Where are we right now?
Well, I certainly think, that in 2019 already we were in a little bit of a bear market, which meant that a lot of the focus in the ecosystem was on building. So you had a lot of people that were really heads down, focusing on building. And in 2020, there was a little bit of a reveal on some of the things that had been happening in the space. I think there was also an understanding fundamentally that some of the use cases that have been touted, their power was sort of seen. And so here I'm talking about things like, traceability or tracking, some of the supply chain sorts of things that had been quite theoretical. I think there was a value seen there. And of course, I think there was tremendous growth in the crypto industry, tremendous activity around that, both in terms of the price, crypto, Bitcoin specifically, started to skyrocket, and you saw a development around that, but also the emergence of new kinds of things, or the reemergence rather of things like collectibles, non-fungible tokens, decentralized finance. Like a lot of these things started to hit the market, and I think that we saw their effects in ways that were profound and ways that were maybe a little more mercenary, but certainly a lot of activity, I think, that was accelerated by the fact that a lot of people were at home on their, at their desks, heads down, doing a lot of hard work.
Well, Ben, your team and yourself certainly, experienced that. What was it for you when COVID hit, in your experience in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the advent of COVID was No, it was frustrating in a number of different ways. Of course, operating a decentralized organization with developers and contributors all over the place, you're more robust with respect to COVID than most companies, right? I mean, we keep on developing stuff. We're decentralized anyway. We can all work from home, right? So you're not suffering like a regular company would as a decentralized blockchain-based network. But what I found really frustrating is I saw so many ways that blockchain technology, both our technology and SingularityNET and general purpose blockchain technologies being developed by others, could really profoundly help with the COVID pandemic, right? It was really clear, like, okay, you want to do tracking and tracing like in a secure way that doesn't violate anyone's privacy. Well, yeah, we can do that. You want to have people upload their medical records so that we can, analyze who is more susceptible to getting serious disease, without violating confidentiality. Like, we can do that. We can do, multi-party computing for secure machine learning analysis over everyone's medical data. I mean, you have clinical trials all over the world. Well, you could share data among those clinical trials and do like collaborative machine learning analysis without violating anyone's personal or national like sovereignty, right? So there's so much that you could do, and yet so little willingness on the part of the national organizations regulating most of this stuff. So little willingness to actually roll out blockchain-based solutions at really large scale, right? So there has been blockchain use in the context of combating COVID-19, and we've done some things, others have done more things. On the other hand, we didn't see like a global coordinated blockchain-based effort to track COVID spread, to analyze clinical trials, to analyze personal medical data. Like this should have been there. We actually had the tech working among a whole different blockchain-based projects, a whole bunch of them to do it, and you just don't have the buy-in, and it's partly because it's government agencies controlling most of pandemic response, right? And government agencies just are slow to move and don't want to take risks, and blockchain is still viewed as a risk. And I mean, then you have, Amazon, Google, Facebook, these big tech companies have just gained more and more power and more resources in the course of the pandemic. And, in a sense, it could have been decentralized enterprises that are filling in the gaps and filling the new niches created by people working from home and so forth. But I would say that's not really the way it panned out. So in a way, it felt like a missed opportunity, and it starts you thinking like, well, let's say 5 years from now, there's another pandemic or another major crisis of some type that we're not foreseeing now. Like, can we make it so that when the next weird crisis hits, like the day
that we're ready.
The day is saved by the decentralized community rather than being saved kind of lamely by government agencies, and rather than the shift in the economy serving primarily to enrich a handful of huge tech companies, right? And I think we can. Like, I think a lot of progress has been made in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And we're not more than like a couple more years off from the blockchain ecosystem being mature enough to step in and really like kick ass when the need is there. But it's
I mean, it was a missed opportunity, right, Sheila?
Yeah, well, exactly. I think that part of this is there was a lot of like, if only we'd had, these systems in place, then XYZ would have happened. Stimulus payments could have gone more directly and immediately into the economy and people that were intended to have them, but we could have traced a PPE by the time when it was being diverted, back a year ago, and probably even now. So there were a lot of these very concrete examples. And so I think in some ways, blockchain had seemed sort of incremental. Well, I'm not really concerned about security, or I don't really need extra traceability. It always seemed kind of marginally improved. And I think what became really clear was that it would represent a systemic improvement. And I think that now that case is laid. And so while the tech has been maturing, I think that the policy readiness, the policy landscape readiness has also been maturing. And I do think that COVID accelerated that greatly. So I don't think you would have seen, Chairman Powell of the Fed, say, looking at this and a digital dollar, for example, is a priority. I don't think that that would have happened without the pandemic, frankly. I mean, who could say? There's obviously different priorities, but I do feel like the concreteness of the missed opportunities is something that has paved the way for a more amenable, enabling environment, if you want to call it that, in the policy landscape. And simultaneously with the tech maturing, I think we're going to see some pretty powerful changes that come up, I think, as been noted in the next couple of years. At least that's certainly the direction of travel that we're seeing, and it's certainly my hope.
What you've just basically set out, Ben and Sheila, is that what COVID did was expose how far apart the two worlds were still. So in blockchain, absolutely, Ben. I mean, we were seeing in real time how applications of this could really have fundamental real life impact almost immediately. Sure. And it only meant that if a Pfizer or, a big firm, big pharma or a big national program picked it up and ran with it. We have seen also the healthcare response that has been politicized really around the world. So you could just pick and choose each country and you can see how the politicization of COVID-19 response has been. So it's hard to idealize or want to incept still very much a maturing technology where those bridges have not been built yet. Mm-hmm. So now that we're building that bridge, right, and still more work needs to be done. When I talk about interoperability, I want to take that concept and move beyond protocols talking to each other. The most ideal interoperability is between legacy systems and blockchain. How far apart are we there? Sheila, I want to start with you because, at World Economic Forum, your entire mandate is to help facilitate this understanding, this education within systems, within legacy systems.
Yeah, we published a series of white papers over the course of the fall that were really called Building Bridges. And so it was really thinking about how do you connect, not technically, because again, the technical bridges are, there's some are easier than others, certainly, but that is largely a solved problem. The issue really comes up in the policy landscape. So it's things like the legal obligations and how they flow. It's how you treat data, the flow of data through these different systems. It's what happens when when you exit a blockchain-backed system and you go back into a legacy environment. A lot of these things are very complicated. And so we actually spent quite a bit of time looking at the legal frameworks that need to accompany interoperability among these systems, because I do think we're going to continue to see, a difference in pace of adoption. Now, ultimately, our belief is that a blockchain will become part of a tech stack. So there will be components, of your tech stack that layer into a blockchain in various ways, depending on your industry, your particular business, what you see the competitive advantage being there, your ROI on that as you're assessing it, a million different things, right? The environments, the jurisdictions, literally you're probably in. So we do think there's going to be a pretty long tail on the existence of legacy systems that maybe don't have blockchain capabilities, and so that interoperability becomes particularly important. But yes, I think that we're at a point, as you said in your opening remarks, Angie, where everyone is looking at this. Every company is looking at this, and they have been for quite some time. That definitely, the pace of that accelerated around COVID. But I also think that, some companies are going to decide that their legacy system is serving their needs at the moment, and that they need to be able to operate and connect into other systems that are blockchain backed, but that they themselves are going to retain a walled garden of their own systems because that suits their need for the moment. And that's going to be a very customized decision made by every entity, including, by the way, government. So I agree with you 100%.
In an industry point of view, Ben, do you have that same experience where, as Sheila said, corporates are starting to realize, oh, COVID, we got waylaid by that. We got to think ahead. Are you experiencing that yourself? What are the kind of conversations you are having with corporate partners, with enterprise solutions? Do you think that is evolving?
To be honest, I think it's evolving very slowly, and the evolution may stop very soon. So I mean, I honestly get the feeling. I mean, it may be different in different parts of the globe, right?
Yeah.
So
So
I'm
which
not
part of the
sure
globe are you talking about? Are you talking about
I'm
the
not
West
sure what's
or
going on in
Asia?
mainland China right now. So I've been in the U.S. for the last year. I'm waiting to go back to Hong Kong until they get rid of the 21-day quarantine requirement. So
I hear you on that.
yeah, I mean, I've got a 3-year-old kid and a 3-week-old baby. I'm not doing 3 weeks in a hotel room with those kids.
That is
I
totally
mean,
understandable.
I've been in the U.S. and doing business here as well as living, and I think honestly, what I see is vaccines are rolling out, and people are just like, business is going back to normal soon. Let's forget this pandemic ever existed. And I think that will be the almost universal case in U.S. business, to be perfectly honest. And I think the blockchain community, may take that approach also. But what I'm hoping is that, just through the natural advancement of blockchain technology, like I think the blockchain world is at a point of transition from, being a niche thing to making networks that actually perform well enough to be used in mainstream applications. So I'm thinking the blockchain world is in a position where in the next year or two, we're going to transition into making the type of tools that can be useful, broadly, pandemic or not. But then there are special advantages that a decentralized infrastructure has in an emergency situation, right? Because I mean, you don't have a single point of failure, and you have security by design built in. You have a certain robustness in the decentralized network just due to its mathematical properties that you don't have in centralized systems. So I'm thinking, in US and probably to be honest, probably every democratic country with a predominantly free market economy, I personally think the pandemic will be forgotten as rapidly as possible, and industry and government will not do anything about it. But that the natural advance of decentralized technology will mean that in a few years we have a much more robust layer of technologies, which is great. Now in mainland China or Russia or other more top-down planning based countries, you might actually find that the lessons of the pandemic are absorbed better and are baked into their 5-year plans and so on. Because I mean, the big advantage of this sort of centralized government system is you can do long-term planning in a way that's not just like looking to your quarterly profits, right? I mean, those economies are worse at a lot of things, but they are better at like structured long-term planning, and that could be an advantage. And
I'm going to push back a little bit on that, though, because I totally hear you. I totally hear you on the U.S. experience, the day-to-day. That is what we are observing, and you're experiencing firsthand from a business point of view, from a blockchain point of view. From a COVID point of view, what we saw from here in Asia, as you know, Ben, this is also your backyard here. When we had SARS, when the SARS, pandemic first arrived, which was more than a decade ago, it really shook infrastructure. There were policies in place, a population was trained. The responses were clear so that when COVID hit this time, the response in Asia was very different from the West that never experienced this type of pandemic or healthcare crisis before. So we saw that baked in. But I wonder, to your point, because we're seeing a different experience here in Asia, where the blockchain innovation remains really thick. The enterprises are circling, that is for sure.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there is a bifurcation of interest, Asia versus the West. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know that I disagree with what Ben said or what you said, Angie. I mean, I think that there's a compatibility, because I do think that blockchain is emerging as almost inevitably ubiquitous. I just
Yeah.
think that's more subtle, and so I think that the resistance that I saw a couple of years ago to a blockchain, there was some strong resistance on the part of US businesses to it. Like, they felt like they had to fully really understand it, and I think that blockchain's gonna have made it in the West, but we're not talking about it anymore. When it's just part of it, like the way we don't talk about what protocol underlies how our internet is functioning. Like, those are not things that we spend our time thinking about. Now, I think the applications are going to continue to get a lot of attention. Certain uses of digital wallets, vaccine passports, whatever it might be, identity, layer credentialing, crypto itself, these kinds of things. But the technology, I feel like it's getting to a point where its relative advantages and challenges, are more known and understood. So the resistance to it, I think, is mitigated a lot, and I think that's you kind of see that in the West. So it isn't necessarily the thing that people are always chomping at the bit to talk about, here in the United States. But I don't think that necessarily means that people are against it or resistant or not, into it. I think they're just like, sure, I understand why that could matter. Like, I now understand more concretely why that could matter, right?
Companies are opening up to blockchain a lot more.
Yeah.
I think in terms of like future pandemic response, though,
Different
like
question.
if you look
Okay,
in
that's a fair
look
point.
in South Korea, where we're doing some things with SingularityNET. So there's all these smart city initiatives around South Korea, and these are industry government collaborations, and they're quite open to working with SingularityNET or other blockchain-based projects in the infrastructure of these smart cities. And companies are open to that, and they're looking at encryption to in different countries that are doing different things in the city. And so you can see how if that proceeds, you're going to wind up with like a genuine smart blockchain-based infrastructure that would make it South Korea able to deal even better with the pandemic or whatever other crisis happens. Now, if we look in US, like we've done a bunch of work with Cisco systems in SingularityNet. Now, Cisco is open to blockchain. I mean, they're very technologically sophisticated, but you certainly don't have the relation between Cisco and the US government that you do between, say, Samsung and Korean government or something, right? So, I mean, you're not, you will get blockchain rolling out all over the place in industry in the US. To what extent it would enable like a more coordinated response to another pandemic in future is that's sort of up for grabs, because U.S. government is like statewide and locally oriented.
Myopic too, right?
It's,
The
it's
political
locally
exchange.
fragmented, which is decentralized, right? And it's but it's decentralized in an archaic way. I set up a couple hundred years ago, and you can't update the smart contracts governing the relation between state governments and federal government, right? Because we created a AI-based simulation modeling framework to simulate the spread of COVID and to estimate the impact of different COVID management policies, which was really quite interesting. And you find it depends on social behaviors as much as on epidemiology. Like if the social network is clumpy in the sense that like there are groups of people that all tend to do similar things. They could be geographical groups, it could be behavioral demographic groups. So if there's like clumpiness in the social network, then spreading is much slower, right? And so you could manage COVID-19 not by lockdowns, but by doing things like giving people rewards for shopping or dining out near their house or something, right? Like anything that would enforce some homophily, as they call it, or clumpiness in social networks. And so if you want to sell or even donate the use of a simulation modeling package in US for combating COVID-19, like you're down to selling things to local governments, which are just they're just not equipped to deal with advanced science. If you're doing that in Korea, you can go right to the top at the national level, and similar in Taiwan or Hong Kong, right? So, I mean, it seems like the way US is organized makes it hard to roll out sophisticated things for things that involve government. But I mean, if it's for e-commerce, like, I mean, of course, Amazon could roll out blockchain for e-commerce as soon as it benefited them, and if they find that lets them avoid serving people like rotten food in Whole Foods, they'll put blockchain through
right.
Well,
right?
let's talk about that, Ben. That is a great point, because when we talk about, because Korea is still a developing nation, right? Samsung is what, 25% of its GDP. They should talk to each other. So that relationship is very thick and strong and nationalistically aligned. In the US, as you say, it is a developed nation. The legacy systems, legacy industries, tech has risen. You mentioned Amazon. Jeff Bezos added $90 billion to his personal wealth, up 80% as a result of COVID for a whole host of reasons, right? At what point does it require, maybe it's not government in the US, maybe it is big tech giants like Amazon, to integrate some of this, the real world application of blockchain, to your point, incentivizing people to shop closer to home, incentivizing people, or giving discounts to wear masks, things like that.
If you're expecting big tech companies to act for the common good rather than maximization of shareholder value, I think you're going to be badly disappointed, right? I mean, we just had this whole crazy kerfuffle with Google, like firing their AI ethics team, and I mean, this was a small thing, but it's symbolic of what, just of the fact that big tech companies have become just like oil companies or any other large company. I mean, I don't think they're any worse or any better. They're just large corporations that are after maximizing shareholder value, and for whom,
well, look, if your shoppers are dying, you should be incentivized to make sure that your shoppers, who are your economic benefit to your bottom line, remain healthy and strong. Maybe that's like an incentivization right there.
Yeah, in that case,
we hope.
In that case, that would be true. And certainly Amazon is motivated not to sell poisoned food. On the other hand, Whole Foods, I mean, has been known for a long time as the whole paycheck market, right? So I mean, it's not the lower income Americans who are mostly shopping at Whole Foods either, right? So I mean, the solving things in a way that will maximize the bottom line of a large company is not the same as solving things in a way that will maximize the good of a whole population. And of course, you'll get some benefit from companies trying to maximize profit. But I mean, I don't personally think that will do the whole job. And I mean, I think in some ways the Asian countries have a model that works better, right? I mean, for some things, US model clearly works better. The US model has been better at early stage technology transfer and funding innovation, and you can't deny that. But then for taking existing technologies and rolling them out for broad benefit, I mean, probably the Asian countries have done better. And whether blockchain can help with that part, with helping, say, Asian countries better, foster innovation, and with helping the US better diffuse technologies to the whole population. I mean, potentially it could, like there are
That's
like
a new formula.
there are like pilots and limited use cases of
Yeah.
blockchain
Yeah.
doing both of those things.
That's
But
Sheila's wheelhouse.
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
yeah,
Sheila, that's your
there's a
wheelhouse
lot
right
of
there.
yeah. You know, leaving ESG aside for the moment, because I do think there's a growing movement, and people have very different views. Some range from very cynical to very optimistic about, you know, ESG and how that's going to transform business and the face of business and how business does business and all of that, right? So kind of leaving that aside for the moment, I do think in the US there is a general, on the part of the government, there is a little bit of hesitation around public-private partnerships. And this, of course, is something the forum believes very strongly in, that, you know, public-private partnerships can actually be extraordinarily powerful. It can build a multi-stakeholder coalition that can really accelerate the benefits of technology and enable them to reach more people, which the inclusion model is very important to the work that we do. There is a resistance in the United States, and that has, you know, it comes from whether it's everything from, you can be cynical about it, political favors and lobbyists and whatnot, or just kind of the perception of cronyism, you know, the complications among that.
well, and
Procurement in the
all the
US is
corruption
incredibly
in Korea,
complicated, right?
I mean, it is, the cronyism is real, but somehow
Yeah.
things have worked out okay by and large anyway.
Well, I think it's also just that procurement in the US is extremely complicated, even more so than it is in other parts of the world, right? Being a vendor to the US government is one of the most complicated things a business can take on. It's extraordinarily challenging, you know? So a lot of these things mean that the government, whether it's state, sometimes that's easier at a local level, but not usually, you know, and there's so much scrutiny. And so I think that, you know, the reality is that government is not the best, you know, user in early stage of technology until it's much further along than I think it needs to be in other countries. I think there's just an easier willingness to be early adopter on the part of government, you know, certainly in Asia than we see in the United States. And so I do think some of what you're observing and seeing reflects just that reality here. But again, I do think that there is an inevitability, you know, I would say, and I use that word deliberately, to the advent of blockchain. And I think that the case in the US is going to be proven by big enterprise. But eventually, no matter how late an adopter government might be, they are usually an eventual adopter. And so to me, the question becomes more of what is the time period? And, you know, critically in the context of the pandemic, will that be in time to create any sort of meaningful solution to the next crisis that emerges? Because I certainly don't think COVID-19 is the last time we're going to see a situation, you know, like this. That is an open question. It would not surprise me if, you know, the US specifically does not have its ducks in a row before the next big crisis comes down, and we're all left, you know, God forbid, having a panel however many years from now saying, well, if only they paid more attention and responded more quickly, you know, to what we all saw and what again, the missed opportunities that we all observed, particularly in the blockchain space.
This may be the canary in the coal mine right now, this conversation right here. It is so important. And I think we could probably talk about this for hours, and I'm just mindful of the time and the conference goers. We have just a few minutes left, but I want to wrap it up by saying this is a canary in the coal mine. This is a warning shot across the bow. Both Ben and Sheila are totally right about that. The blockchain solutions here right now, why weren't they adopted? Are we ready for the next one? And it really behooves the attention of not only nations, but also people, the populace. So I want to ask this last question. In a post-COVID world, what do you think are the important trends that must develop in blockchain to address the next thing?
I would say we really have to get our heads around consensus on digital identity. I think that I am personally, you know, there's so much happening in the identity credentialing space around health and travel with vaccines or, you know, records or whatever it might be. I'm concerned, not because I don't think that those are important use cases and we want to get people mobile, you know, in the ways that are important to them, their families and society. But because I think we're anchoring on a use case that's relatively narrow, and we really need to be anchoring on a much broader standard, both technically, some of which exists, but also from a policy perspective, to ensure that we are not favoring with our design. We don't kind of lay a path where the easy design choices favor a kind of small minority of people that have the ability to access things like air travel, for example, right? And that we're thinking much more holistically about that challenge. Most people in this space agree, it's kind of an axiom at this point, that once we really have agreement on identity, we're just going to see things blow up. I tend to agree with that. I'm a little less dramatic in my pronouncements about it, but I do think it's an important space. And I think we're seeing really viscerally the need for that to be solved. And I would argue to be solved using some sort of a blockchain-based system, depending on the particular problems that any particular application is trying to solve.
Ben, do you think a consensus blockchain on healthcare in a decentralized, public, transparent way, is this something that you'd love to see, or what do you think?
That's very badly needed. And I mean, we've been prototyping something like that in a project called Rejuve, which is a spin-off of SingularityNET, which is aimed at longevity medicine. So it's like a medical data network for sharing among people who want to live a very long time. So it's like a select community, but it's a microcosm of this problem. And in our work with Hanson Robotics on the Grace humanoid robot, which is a humanoid robot aimed at elder care for use in like senior living and nursing homes. I mean, again, that robot can help medical patients a lot, but it sees everything they're doing. So like you need to encrypt that data, and you need secure data sharing. So I mean, I think that's needed, but I think at a more fundamental level, essentially every aspect of blockchain technology needs to be radically better than the state of the art, or it's not going to be as broadly useful as we're thinking. Like right now, transactions are still very slow. Like how long do you wait for an Ethereum or Bitcoin transaction to happen? How much gas cost do you pay to make a simple trade on the Ethereum network now? I mean, how usable is it really to like install MetaMask in your browser to make a transaction, as opposed to like typing your credit card number into a form? I mean, how many bugs does the average programmer make when they write a Solidity contract for DeFi? So many bugs compared to like a random Python code or something. So, and then, I mean, in terms of like decentralization and democratic governance, most of the major blockchain networks are actually controlled by a small number of oligarchs, a lot of whom are criminals, right? So, I mean, you in principle have decentralized governance. In practice, you have the decentralized networks that are often controlled by a small number of parties behind the scenes, right? So, I mean, essentially every key aspect of blockchain-based networks doesn't yet work very well. Yet, there are algorithmic approaches to solving all these things, and there are working demonstrations of all these things being solved within projects in the blockchain world. I mean, so we're working a lot with Cardano network now, and that, on their testnet solves almost all these problems, but we need all that rolled out into mainnet, and Ethereum 2.0 is on the way, right? So I mean,
any day now, so we hear, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're porting SingularityNet to Cardano, so I'm more confident that's really on the way. But I mean, there's going to be a lot of blockchains that solve all these issues.
Yeah.
Well,
to your point,
issues maybe harder actually, but I mean, I think we're close, but we're not there on so many critical dimensions.
Totally agree. And I also think that I do think that it's important, I think, to stop looking at blockchain in isolation. Like crypto is one thing, but blockchain is intersecting in really powerful ways with neural networks, with AI, with algorithms. Like that's important, and that's going to benefit the technology. And so I do think that, we encourage everyone here, like all of our constituents and stakeholders, to stop thinking about any particular technology in isolation. Those combinatorial, possibilities that I think we're really going to unlock actual interesting opportunities, and so I agree. I couldn't agree more that I think that there is a tremendous amount of benefit that the blockchain community is. I think there's more understanding of this, and more. Before it was kind of like the Wild West, and they were all cowboys that wanted to kind of own, bubble, doing their own thing, like sort of the crypto libertarians or whatever. Now there's much more of an awareness of the context in which blockchains exist. Systemic context, policy context, and technological context. And so my hope is that we'll continue to see that happen going to be part of a bigger system that's going to be
Absolutely right.
enabling other things that sit on top of it or next to it or adjacent, or all these different things are going to wind up being quite literal. So I think that what you've described, Ben, is an example of that. And I'm hopeful that we're going to see even more of that, and a recognition on the part of the blockchain community, which I already think there is, that the tech does need to be in a more robust, more solid place before people are going to feel confident in really porting their, their livelihoods right over onto it.
Amen to that. Amen to that. I mean, it really is about, we often talk about blockchain, even just a couple of years ago, as a parallel system that suddenly, the legacy system would port into the new system and then we'd be off. But in fact, what we know is it's more of an evolution than a revolution. It is about blockchain at the intersection of all of those technologies, IoT, 6G, quantum, and then at the intersection of business, politics, and economy. I feel like I'm quoting our own mission in journalism at Forkast to you, but that's absolutely true. That's what we're seeing. And, at the end of the day, these are solutions that are more powerful, integrated. We're not asking you to vote for either or. It is about integration.
Yeah, you remember, I mean,
ahead.
I'm an old man now, so I remember in the early days of the internet, it was all about like in cyberspace, this or that happens, right? And so now there's no more cyberspace. Like cyberspace is just your everyday life, right?
Exactly.
Right.
You'd have the internet world, which is like a different world, and then you'd have the regular world. But actually now the internet world and the regular world are the same world. And I think it's the same thing with blockchain. It's not really going to be like, there's the crypto ecosystem.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And we're going to put that in the garbage and we'll all move to the crypto ecosystem.
Exactly.
Really, crypto will
integration.
infuse the world as internet infuse the world.
Correct.
And if you can infuse the world with more like decentralization and security and configurable privacy, I mean that's better than making some other weird worlds, because you're not really gonna get everyone to port over to that wholesale, but you can transform how every IT system works, right? And I think we're getting that.
Exactly.
Let's hope we evolve to a place where we are going to be ready, because whatever happens next, we will be in a better spot because of these emerging technologies, including blockchain, and emerging thought leaders that you've heard from two of the greatest right now. More of you in the audience at GBA Blockchain Conference. And I hope that you all find each other. This is a virtual world still, but I hope that this conversation, thank you, Sheila Warren of WEF, thank you, Dr. Ben Goertzel of SingularityNET, for really inspiring us to think a little bit more about everybody's role, because we need to be prepared. That's the only way that we can move forward. So thank you all, and thank you all for joining us on this conversation. There are so many more conversations to be had at the conference, so do check it out. Thank you for joining us. I'm Angie Lau, Forkast.news Editor-in-Chief, Founder and CEO. I want to thank you, and we'll see you around. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.